Hello and welcome to the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority Grants tutorial on completing your final report. The first step is asking yourself, are you ready to complete your Maryland Heritage Areas Authority or your MHAA final report? And you should be asking yourself, have you completed your project? Have you spent all the grant and match funds that were included in your budget that's in your grant agreement? Or the budget in your most recent amendment letter if you have amended your budget. And you want to keep in mind that the very last payment you receive from MHAA will be reimbursable. So you need to have spent everything that's in your budget, but you won't have actually received that last payment. You'll get reimbursed for that when your final report is approved. Also ask yourself, have you taken pictures of your project deliverables, or have you otherwise finalized those deliverables? If they're reports, for example, are those ready to submit as part of your final report? And then you should ask, if your project completion date and your final report due dates are approaching, but you haven't gotten to this point yet, you haven't actually completed the project and the spending, then at that point you should consider requesting an extension from your project monitor. So reach out to any one of us MHAA staff and ask for that extension if that's needed. But assuming that you have completed all of this and you're ready to complete the final report, let's go over the steps you would then take. The very first thing to do is to go to MHT's website, mht.maryland, spelled out, .gov, and you can see it there on the screen. And you'll use the same login credentials that you used when you applied for the grant to log into My Grant account. If those login credentials have changed, then you can use your updated credentials or contact an MHAA staff person to make sure you're logging in using the right email and password. If you've simply forgotten your password, you can click on the Forgot Password link and reset that password. And we've got a video about exactly how to reset your password as well if it turns out you have trouble with that. So let's go through the steps in detail here. We've gone to the website mht.maryland.gov, as I mentioned, and you'll see here under Resources on the left-hand side the My Grant Account button. That's where you'll click, and you'll be taken to a screen that looks like this. It may have your email address remembered from when you've logged in previously, but if not, go ahead and put in the email address that's associated with your grant, put in the password, and click Log In. And then you'll come to a page, probably the Applications tab will be open. You actually want to go to the Requirements tab, which is where you'll find your various report forms. And once you're here under the Requirements tab, you may also need to change the Show menu to find the report form that you want. So depending on whether or not you've started your final report form, it might be under In Progress Requirements, or it might be under New Requirements if you haven't started it at all, started working on it. And you also can see there's an option for submitted requirements, so you can see reports that you've already submitted as well. So at this point, I'm going to go back to In Progress Requirements because I had started the MHAA final report form and saved it. And you'll see it's showing up right here. Your project title for your specific grant would show up there. And it says MHAA Final Report right here. It also has the due date listed for when this report is due to us. So when you're ready to start working on the report, just click on the blue or purple text over here to open it. It should take you to this screen right here. And you'll see that a lot of your information will already be filled out. Depending on what you put into your application when you applied for the grant, but you'll be asked to complete a series of fields telling us, for example, how much of the cash match that you thought you were going to spend you actually spent. So you would put in a number here according to what that is. Same for in-kind match. You would put in a number depending on how many volunteer hours were actually spent on the project or how many donated services or materials. You would calculate that. And if there were costs that were above and beyond what was covered by the grant and above and beyond what was covered by the match that you are required to have, then you would put that number here for other project costs. And so I'm just putting arbitrary numbers there to show you, but you would do that in detail. And then you would give us an update, a brief narrative report, and evaluation of the project. It gives you in detail what we want included here. You would talk about the deliverables produced as part of your project here. If this applies to you, the Minority Business Enterprise Plan, you would give us an update on that here. Again, if that's applicable to your project. And then you'll also see here, either at the very bottom, and it's also linked at the top, there's a form that you need to download to complete to certify the grant and match spending that you've done on the project. It's called a Certification of Expenses form. And again, you can click right here and download it, or you can go down to the bottom here, click and download that Certification of Expenses form. So I'll download that here. And you'll also be telling us how much you're requesting as your final payment. So you probably have calculated, this is how much we've received to date, this is what's remaining. When you're coming in for the final report, you do want to be requesting everything that's remaining on your grant that hasn't been dispersed to date. So if you are working on a final report for a grant that's fiscal year 2019 or earlier, one of our older grants that hasn't been closed yet, then in that case, you do need to make sure that you're downloading the correct form. If you download a form that looks like this that I have on my screen right now, it says MHAA Request for Disbursement, that's actually our old form. You should be working with the MHAA Certification of Expenses form instead. So if you download a form that looks like this, just close that out, go back to MHT's website, mht.maryland.gov, go to Funding, go to Grants, and you'll see a link to a Certification of Expenses form. This is the form you want to use for your final report. Now, usually, in most cases, you'll be prompted to download this form in the report form itself. And going back to the Certification of Expenses form here, you would open that downloaded form, whatever that looks like. You may need to go to your Downloads folder on your computer, depending on how you have it set up. And we can take a look at the form here. So you would put in your grantee federal ID number, your FEIN number as an organization. This date of certification is the date when you're completing and submitting this form. So that's the date you would put there. The name and address of your organization, which is the grantee. And we also want a contact person. So that's probably you if you're filling it out, your name, address, and telephone number of whoever the grantee contact is. And then when we get down here into the form itself, we have a video that's more detailed that talks about filling this out, but just as a very quick review, under the use of funds column, you would want to put in the exact line item language that's in your approved grant budget. Either you would find that in your grant agreement itself or in an amendment letter. So let me bring up the grant agreement. So this should be a PDF document that you received and signed right when your grant project was getting started, and you can see the line items included there, exhibit development consultants and staff support, and how much you expected you'd be spending in each of these categories. So let's see if we can have these two documents open simultaneously. Great. And we'll put the exact language from the line item in your approved budget over here into the certification of expenses form. And you may need to just expand that line item to see everything and make sure that you have spelled everything correctly. And then you'll tell us how much of the grant funds you actually have spent. So because this is your final report, we're hoping that you've spent all the grant funds that were allocated in your budget already. And again, that last payment you'll be getting from us is in fact reimbursable. So of course you haven't received all the money yet, but you've spent everything that was allocated. And then you'll fill out how much of your grantee required match or required contribution you have spent to date. And if it turns out that you ended up spending more in one line item and less in another, that's okay. So let's say you expected you would spend $7,500 in staff support, but when you totaled all the hours for that staff support, it turned out to be more like $10,000. So you'd put that in here. This is how much you have spent in that line item. And so then you still ended up spending, let's say you still ended up spending even more in the exhibit development consultants line item as well as part of your match, because total you were their total cost ended up being a little bit more. So in that, and you can just delete these other line items that you're not using if you'd like, make it easier to work with. And you look and see here now though that the total match is actually over what's required. The total match required is $48,500, and you've actually spent a total of $52,000 here. So in that case, what you would want to do is move some of this match over into the other project costs column. And that's showing us that you have spent above and beyond what was required by the match. So I would just do a quick calculation here and say, okay, well, I've spent $52,000 and subtract what was required, the $48,500. And so I've spent about $3,500 more than was required. So I'll go ahead and put that in the other project costs column over here, and I'll subtract it from the $42,000 that was spent here, so that to make sure we're being accurate. And so you'd end up with something looking a little bit like this. You would then total. You could either do this manually by calculating or do a quick sum there, showing the total that you've spent in each line item. And then I always like to make this format. All right, and it totals automatically there. And just to review, even though your spending looks a little bit different than what was expected in your budget over here, that's okay. If you had wanted to completely eliminate a line item because you're not spending anything in it, or if you had wanted to add a new line item because you're spending on something completely different with the project, those are the cases when you need to request a budget amendment from MHAA staff. But in cases where you're just spending a little bit differently than what was expected and the line items are staying the same in terms of the total amounts, you can just tell us how much you spent and you don't need to request an amendment. So there's another date that is asked for on the form down here, and that's the date when your grant agreement was actually fully executed or finalized by the Maryland Department of Planning when you first entered into that agreement with us. And you can find that date in your grant agreement document as well. If for some reason you can't find your grant agreement document, just let us know and we can send you a new PDF of that. But you should be able to scroll up through and find a page that looks like this, and it has date of execution on behalf of MHAA, or effective date. And that is the date you want to put in here. So the next part of this form is just the signature, your title, whoever's signing, and the date that it was signed. And that would be the same date as the date of certification up here. Now you have some different options for this. You can either print out the form and sign it manually and scan it back in, putting in your date and title as well there. Or you can sign using a digital signature process, something like Adobe Sign or a similar product. So whatever works for you is fine with us, but we do need a signed copy. What we don't want is for you to just type your name in there. That we would not be able to accept. And if you fill out this form and your project monitor reviews it and sees anything that's off or they have questions about, they'll get back in contact with you and ask you about it. So that's a little about the certification of expenses form. And that's a very important part of completing your final report and receiving your final payment. And keep in mind too, when you are signing that form, you're certifying, you're promising and giving your word that all of those expenses have been spent that you're listing there. So if you're audited later, or if you are spot checked and you're requested to provide financial documentation, you need to have written documentation of all of those expenses that you're listing there. And that brings up another point. If you are selected for spot check, then you'll be notified of that around the time of your project completion date by your project monitor. And if that's the case, then you will also be uploading financial documentation that supports and shows that spending. And we have a video all about what to include as part of your financial documentation if that's the case. But if you are not selected for spot check, you just need to upload this certification of expenses form to show what you've spent, and then to sign and certify, indicating that all those expenses have really been incurred. So you'd put the final amount you're requesting here, and I'm just estimating, and you'd put the date when you filled out the certification of expenses form and the date you're submitting this report. When you're done with this page and you filled everything out here, you can also go to the next page, and this is where you'll upload that certification of expenses form that you just completed. So you would have saved that certification of expenses form somewhere on your computer, and you'll title it here that's what you're uploading. And you'll navigate to the file using Choose File here. And it'll depend on where you've saved that file. You may have to explore in your folders and find it. But once you find the one that is actually signed and ready to go, it might be a PDF in that case if you've printed it out and scanned it, you would then just click on it here and you would select Upload. Then it will show you the files that you upload successfully up here under the red bar. And you can even download what you've uploaded and make sure you uploaded the right one by clicking there. On the attachments page, we also want you to upload any deliverables that you've completed as part of your project, as part of your final report. So that may be photographs documenting that you did the work. It may be reports or plans that were produced. It really just depends on your project. But you would go through the same process here of titling the document that you want to upload. Maybe you're uploading a photo of an exhibit, and we'd want several photos, not just one. So maybe you're numbering them. And again, doing the same process of navigating out, finding the file you want, selecting Open. Once you've uploaded everything and that you have a list here of all the files, then you're ready to review the report and actually submit it. And if you find that you want to upload something and the file is too big, then in that case you can just email that to your project monitor or put it in a Dropbox or some kind of file sharing folder to send to your project monitor, and we'll be able to accept it that way as well. So when you're ready to submit the report, you click on Review. If you wanted to save and come back later, you could do that, but Review. And it's telling me here that there was a problem because I haven't completed all the required fields. So let me go down here and see what we haven't completed. And that's because I didn't put anything in this narrative about how the project went. So we would want between 0 and 500 words here, just talking about the project again, but I'm just going to put test for now, but that would be telling us how everything went and what was completed. So once you've filled out all the required forms and you've got all of your attachments, including your certification of expenses form attached here, you'd click Update. And then at this point, you can finally go ahead and actually submit your final report. So you would click on this Submit button either here or at the very bottom, just making sure everything's here again. And then you would get a message like this. Thank you, your materials have been submitted. You should receive an email confirmation shortly. And at that point, your project monitor will receive notification that you've submitted your final report, and they'll start reviewing that report along with MHT staff. They'll get in contact with you if they need any additional documents, or if it turns out you were selected for spot check and you hadn't been notified for some reason, they will let you know at that point so you can submit those additional documents. And you should receive your final payment hopefully between 45 and 60 days after submitting your final report. Just reach out to your project monitor with any questions, and that would either be myself, Ennis Smith, Jennifer Ruffner, the administrator of the program, or Andrew Arvizu. And any one of us can help you if you don't know who your project monitor is. And thank you so much for watching this tutorial.